It is Friday, the 7th of February, 2020. Hope you had a good week in the market. We bounced back nicely here. The Russell 2000 is still down year to date, however. But the market overall, we're seeing, is still resilient. Of course, the coronavirus was the big scare. And we started out this week, here we're looking at a 30-minute time frame. And on this, we have, of course, that orange 5-day moving average that I always have on the charts. And we came in this week below the declining 5-day moving average. Of course, that big gap higher changed the course of things and ended that little bout of profit taking. We came into the market cautious, not bearish, because we had the longer term picture still higher as we closed right on that 50-day moving average. And of course, if you recall, the volume weighted average price from these bigger levels was coming into play. Back to that 15-minute time frame, you can see that the volume weighted average price from that gap that we saw on Tuesday is where we found buyers here so far today. We are below the volume weighted average price of the last 3 days, but we still have a rising 5-day moving average. So the market is back to healthy once again. And of course, being in the middle of earnings season, there's a lot of individual stock movement that's dependent upon how the earnings are coming out there. The NASDAQ, obviously, that measured move is something we looked at in the past that really doesn't have much relevance now because we had a nice shakeout at that level and the market continued higher. We've only closed higher than today's close once, and that was yesterday, of course. So you can't be too bearish with all-time highs. The volume weighted average price from that gap is just a little bit lower. I think that early next week we want to see that this is our area where we see support hold. If we can hold about 266.75-ish, we continue to give the benefit of the doubt to the buyers. Breaking below there, we probably want to be a little bit more defensive. And going back to the S&P 500, I'd say probably at about that 330 level is the key level that we want to see hold next week. Now, the Russell, as I mentioned, was down this week, but it made some good progress. It's down for the month and the year, that is, but this week it made some good progress. It was really looking pretty awful, but if you recall, the volume weighted average price from the October low is exactly where the buyers defended this market. So obviously a volume weighted average price from that level is going to be important. So if we just drag on this and move it over, you can see we're pretty much right at that level. So, we underperformed a little bit in the Russell 2000, but this is exactly what I was telling subscribers what we were looking for. That actually this is the level we wanted to see hold. 165.50, because that's the volume weighted average price off of this peak and this low in the 5-day moving average. So next week we're still a little bit cautious coming into this market, but if it can start to heal like this, then perhaps the Russell 2000 can get back on track and show us that the buyers are serious about taking this market higher. But for now, still have to be a little bit cautious. Semiconductors had a good week as well. Maybe they continue to pull back down towards that 50-day moving average and settle in there. We are right at the 5-day moving average. So we can also take a look at the volume weighted average price off this low. And of course, we're pretty much dead on at it right now. So this is going to be an important level to hold. I'm not one to buy at these levels. That is, I'm not going to buy blindly into it because there's a volume weighted average price there. Sometimes those levels turn out to be the absolute low, such as they did in the Russell 2000. If that's your approach, there's more than one way to use this information, and the key is to do what makes sense for you personally. Biotech stocks did pull back a little bit here today, but had a good week. Here's the volume weighted average price from that gap that we saw 4 days ago. Here's the week to date volume weighted average price and off of that low. So next week, I'd like to see that maybe we can pull back in towards 119, 120, because that would allow for just a little bit further, I think, in here, maybe a little bit further profit taking and then set up for a continuation move higher, something that would look like this on the daily chart next week. We don't want to be the people who buy these breakouts at extended levels. This market, it briefly got above that, very similar to the financials. Financials broke out this week, but again, do you trust a breakout after it's just run from 29.75 to 31.25? No, you ask yourself, where has it come from? Where did it have the potential to go? And that's showing us a little bit of resistance right now over the last 2 days. It's not a major thing. It's not something to be worried about. It's just about smart timing. What we want to see hold is probably about that 30.75 level this week coming at probably 30.50, let's say. That's where we have the 20 and the 50-day moving average levels. If we take a look at a 30-minute time frame and put a volume weighted average price off of this low and this low, you can see that gives us that little 30.50 to 30.75 area as well. So that's what we'd be looking to hold in there. I spoke about Tesla a number of times this week. I mean, pretty much everyone did if you're involved in the market. Just this run has been fantastic. Looking at a 30-minute time frame, some of the key levels were, of course, we've got the volume weighted average price from the beginning of the month, which would go right here, and that's the week to date as well. So you can see this week we were actually, let's look at it on the 10-minute time frame. This week we were, that's this purple, and I'll just change it to an obnoxious, let's make it pink so that it stands out better. But this is our week to date volume weighted average price, and we closed well below that. We also have this red volume weighted average price, which is off of the peak. So from that peak we held below. If we draw a volume weighted average price from this peak, you can see we're starting to have a lot of supply build overhead, and that next week, possibly getting back below these lows would be an opportunity for it to continue lower. The key is, though, if you trade the short side, you got to make sure that you know where your stop is. You can't just get short on a break lower. That's only half the plan. The rest of the plan is how do you manage risk, and it's got to be somewhere up in this area. You can get as detailed as you want on it for whatever time frame, but putting these volume weighted average price levels on it will definitely help offer structure. Very similar is the cryptos. I've been mentioning these the last couple weeks on Twitter that I'm bullish these. Looking at a weekly chart of Bitcoin, you can see I've got a volume weighted average price off of the all-time highs back in 17, 18, and we're holding above that. So then we look at what's more important is what's been going on the daily time frame, and here we are right up against the volume weighted average price from that peak. My expectation is that we probably settle down a little bit and build energy for another move higher. We've been stair-stepping nicely higher in this market, just a beautiful staircase of higher highs and higher lows. And similar is true to we have Ethereum, ETH, USD. I personally look at the information from Gemini. Gemini is where I trade, so that's the liquidity that I'm personally interested in. And you can see that the volume weighted average price off last year's high did not offer any resistance, so maybe that's the way Bitcoin goes as well. But this is getting a little bit extended. If you kind of imagine along with me, if I was drawing here, we could call this a left shoulder right in here, this a big head, and perhaps we're going to pull back from here down towards 190 and then look for a break of this head and shoulders, inverted head and shoulders pattern. Litecoin, these are the only three that I really look at. I know a lot of you might look at some of the, as they call them, the shit coins, but I'm not interested in those. I'm only interested in what they offer basically at Gemini. And here's Litecoin. You can see right up against that volume weighted average price from last year's high as well. So looking at a couple other stocks that I had mentioned on Twitter, I'd been mentioning this Dish Network. Dish Network, it had a great looking daily chart. It was, the way I was presenting it was showing this nice ascending triangle in here, and that energy was building. It broke that pattern, but then it completely failed. So here's what we did at Alpha Trends. It's not what I did. We got involved over, I think right in here, took a third off with, I think, 18 cents. We got stopped out of another third right here, and the final piece right at that point. So now it looks like a failed move. We're completely done with it. I'm not interested in that stock. Smile Direct Club I had mentioned, and this one's behaving well. It's holding above the volume weighted average price from the IPO. It's got a big short position. It's been a little bit choppy in here recently, but it's holding above the volume weighted average price from this move. That's the red line. This is where we have partial stops right now, is just underneath this higher low. Of course, it's always, as I tell subscribers, it's up to you to decide. Do you want to put your stop underneath a low like this, underneath this low, or underneath this low? It depends on what your time frame is, but it's up to you to decide what that is and how to take advantage for your time frame. I had also mentioned APPN, and part of what we don't do is to chase gaps. So on Wednesday when the stock gapped up, or Tuesday when it gapped up, we didn't get involved. Some of you might have, but instead, we're still looking at this one as a potential long, maybe above 54 or so for next week. I go over setups like this every single day for subscribers. If you haven't taken a trial, do so soon. The price is going up, and thanks for tuning in.